Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A canyon hides the ruined dreams of a couple who bet on America falling.
It's really one of the most legendary places in Los Angeles. There are many rumors about what the people who owned it wanted it to become.
A ghost town that offers a rare glimpse into a celebrated era.
And it's become an iconic place to visit and represents truly Americana at its best.
A seaside city conceals neglected buildings that help turn America into a global superpower.
The reason America is as great as it is our maritime culture. It's the maritime industries that have made America the country that it is.
And a much-loved tourist attraction where one woman took on a corrupt institution.
The struggles that she had with the city and, a lot of trying to fight, but eventually it became too much.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. "100 miles south of Las Vegas, in the Mojave Desert, is a town that helped turn this vast continent-spanning land into one unified country."
The environment is hot, dry, appears to be desolate, it appears to be harsh.
There's basically a road, some railroad tracks, and then, rising out of the desert, this abandoned town.
Many of the buildings here are in ruins. But it's not a scene of total dereliction.
Some of them look like there's a little bit more life to them. So there's more going on here than first meets the eye, I think.
One structure has recently been restored to its former glory and is a big hit with those passing through, whether by car or by plane.
You sit here and watch people pull over, they see the sign, they want to take the picture in front of the sign. All day long, this goes on.
The sign is a symbol of a great nation-building achievement, a triumph that has been immortalized in American culture.
It figures in movies, television shows, and even songs.
This is something that shaped the country and made it what it is today.
Albert Okura, a well-known restaurant chain owner in Southern California, bought this ghost town in 2005.
The town, it was pretty much empty. All the buildings, there's no electricity, no water. It was just a shell.
This is the town of Amboy, and Albert's restoration work is putting it back on the map.
Amboy is getting more and more famous all over the world. And every day I wake up, I can't believe the opportunity to sit right in front of me.
The reason for this town's fame begins long before Albert was on the scene.
When you're exploring the grounds, you begin to realize that this story runs a lot deeper and a lot further back than you realized.
The town was established in 1883. Evidence of its origin is now only noticeable to the well-trained eye.
Typically, when you're traveling in the desert and you see the trees behind me, they're called salt cedars. And whenever you see them, they were usually planted by homesteaders. As you see along here in the railroad, they would have been used for windblock, and they're not native to the desert.
Steve Reyes lives 25 miles south of Amboy and is one of the few people who can paint a picture of the now disappeared original town.
The original schoolhouse would have been here, housing for the railroad workers. There would have been a store here as well.
At first, the settlement was simply a water and repair stop for the steam trains.
The steam engines could only go 9 miles before they needed to be replenished with water.
These water-stop communities were named in alphabetical order from west to east, beginning here at the town of Amboy. But Amboy's future was about to dramatically change course thanks to a new invention: the automobile.
In the early 20th century, a car is really a luxury item only for the rich. But the manufacturers work hard to try to make them a more affordable item.
The revolutionary Ford Model T arrived in 1908, but good roads still lagged behind, especially outside of the cities.
There was really nothing out here. There was dirt tracks if you were lucky. But then, over time, these start to develop into roads.
In 1912, for the first time, Americans could take one road from East Coast to West Coast. It was called the National Old Trails Road. It came right through Amboy and would irreversibly change the town.
As modern travel shifted away from the railroad, the residents and the buildings would have moved up towards the road.
The road was now the focus of life in Amboy, but its love affair with automobiles was just getting started.
We start off with the National Old Trails Road, which is a singular type of road, east to west, but we're progressing to a system, a network of roads.
Arriving in 1926, the United States numbered highway system was the beginnings of the nationwide road network we recognize today.
The road that was coming past Amboy was reclassified in this new system, and it would become an icon, the classic Route 66.
The increasing traffic passing through Amboy caught the attention of a local man called Roy Crowell.
Roy was a mechanic and his wife was a cook, so you put the two together and you are able to create a magnificent concept of the gas station, the cafe, a husband and wife. It's just a wonderful kind of story that America was built on. These type of hardworking people that could create something out of nothing.
Roy and his wife built the service station and garage in 1938 and soon realized there was an opportunity for another business too.
Behind the cafe, we have quite a large motel. We have 18 rooms, so it tells you how well this place was doing. It was booming.
It was really a major thoroughfare of cars going up and down the highway. People were looking for rest stops. They needed a place to stay. And this being right in the middle of Needles and Barstow, it would be the natural place that people would stop. You could get something to eat, you could get gas up, and then you'd have a nice hotel where you can spend the night.
But many people knew of Amboy because it had been a stop on a journey triggered by desperation.
So Route 66, during the 1930s, we have a common belief that it was always this mode of travel for enjoyment. But really, during the Dust Bowl era, it took kind of a darker side.
High winds churned up the bare and overplowed farmland in the American prairies, resulting in years of severe dust storms. Vast clouds of dust darkened the sky for days at a time. In many places, the dust drifted like snow, and residents had to clear it with shovels.
Route 66 really offered people a lifeline out of the Dust Bowl. And in John Steinbeck's famous novel, The Grapes of Wrath, he even refers to it as the Mother Road, as if it was the absolute key to survival for all these people.
Roughly 2.5 million people left the Dust Bowl states during the 1930s. It was one of the largest migrations in American history.
I think that's an important part of American society because it really changed the demographics of America. There was a huge influx of people coming into California. So what you would see across Route 66, especially in this area, towns grew and really flourished along Route 66. Amboy would have been one of those larger towns that offered the most amenities.
It grew to include 3 gas stations, 2 cafes, 4 garages, a post office, a church, and a school. But its real heyday was just around the corner.
After World War II, returning soldiers, the economy was good. People had expendable money to purchase cars. There's also associations that are encouraging people to travel along Route 66.
In 1959, Roy passed his businesses onto his son-in-law, Buster Burris, who gave the buildings a fresh new look. He also gave the town its now iconic sign.
The sign and the hotel lobby are really absolute paradigms of the architecture of the time, this gooey modernism, as it was called.
The new buildings gave Amboy a different aesthetic, but the flow of cars remained as steady as ever.
I was fortunate enough to interview a California Highway Patrol officer, and the one thing he talked a lot about was how busy the traffic was. It was this major travel artery through the desert into California.
But Amboy's glory days were numbered.
There was one thing that changed overnight that basically shut the town down, and people moved away and walked away from their stores, locked their doors, never to come back.
The death knell of this place was the opening of the new interstate just north of Amboy. It gave a more direct route from Needles to Barstow.
America is famous for undoing its historic narrative, and Route 66 is a prime example of that. All the successful businesses for many generations that were thriving along Route 66 suddenly get wiped out.
Starved of cars, the population plummeted. Buster clung to his investment until 1995, when he leased his properties to be used as film sets, before finally selling up completely in 2000. After decades of neglect, Amboy has started experiencing a renaissance driven by nostalgia.
So through the years, Amboy, really the birth of it become a tourist destination would have been with the advent of the internet. People from Europe started rediscovering Route 66, and that's when it really became a part of Americana. It was very common to see people from France, from Germany, to stop here at Amboy.
People used to pull into Amboy because it was between here and there. Now it's become an actual destination location.
Albert Okura was also drawn in by the magic of Route 66.
Baby boomers, my generation, they got involved in buying hot rods and Harley Davidsons. They wanted to ride the route. And that's why when Amboy came for sale, I knew I had to buy it.
Albert has restored the gas station, including its 1970s pumps, and has plans for other buildings on his property too.
We have 5 bungalow cabins, ideal for renting and to stay overnight. We need to get the utilities in, and I think that's our goal for this coming year.
But the big moment was back in 2019 with the relighting of the sign.
When we had a grand opening, we had a lot of people fly in, and we had up to 27 planes that day. We got us a lot of attention, a lot of press, become the focal point of everything we do here. It just symbolizes the whole movement of the Route 66 and the whole restoration thing.
Amboy's reawakening has spawned its own slogan, the ghost town that ain't dead yet.
Most of the towns along roads like this have vanished long ago, but Amboy gives us this tantalizing window into what life was like when this culture was at its height.
On the edge of Los Angeles lies a sprawling collection of ruins that shows how fringe societies can lurk in the most unexpected of places.
It's a beautiful landscape. There's steep hills dotted with trees, quite the contrast to the never-ending concrete jungle that is Los Angeles.
But there's something surprising here in this wooded area, something that you wouldn't expect. What we see are stairs, so many stairs, climbing, climbing, climbing everywhere.
There are different pieces of this puzzle littered throughout the woods.
Years of gossip have added to the mystery of this site's true purpose.
There's so many different stories that have been told over the years about what happened here. But what we actually know is fascinating, but it's clearly not the full story.
Hadley Mears started researching the rumors about this place 20 years ago, after a hike here left her with unanswered questions she found too hard to ignore.
This is one of the 2 giant industrial-sized tanks that the folks here put up. They were trying to build something where they would have their own fuel, their own water, and very little dependence on the outside world.
Traveling deeper into the canyon, one building emerges from the trees that is the biggest hint yet as to the scale of this complex.
So this is the pump house, and this is where the double generator was at one point and where the water pump, we believe, was, and there's still a tank back there. And then all around here is basically the infrastructure to build this self-sustaining utopia. And as you're walking through this immense property, you'll see water pipes everywhere, still lining from different culverts to the river.
You also see a leveled out section, a garden.
They were very, very extensively trees growing food so that they'd become totally insular and take care of themselves.
The site has become known as Murphy Ranch.
This infrastructure was built primarily during the mid to late 30s, purchased under the alias Jessie Murphy Widow.
The project was a significant investment of time and money.
What's so remarkable about Murphy Ranch is that this is a hard place to build. We're in a canyon in the middle of the mountains. You have to come down a very long dirt trail to get here. The roads are very rudimentary, yet somehow they built all of this infrastructure, spent around $4 million on Murphy Ranch.
But the ruins that remain today don't begin to tell the whole story.
What they had here was stage 1, effectively, the infrastructure. What was planned next would have been the real deal, the mansion itself.
The project was never finished, but Hadley hunted down all the existing blueprints and discovered a surprising level of opulence.
Common theme between all these different plans is that they're grand. There's a library, multiple parlors, multiple bedrooms. It really seems like a place for a head of state and their government, not a normal rich person's mansion.
It has been said that what the owners were building here was to be based on National Socialist ideals.
Some say this was meant to be a headquarters for the Nazis out on the West Coast, some kind of Nazi White House.
The scant ruins and lack of evidence has only served to fuel the legends. But in 1975, an affidavit from a man called Dr. Vincent shone significant light on the mystery.
That one piece of paper, which I have in my possession, is really where this entire legend comes from.
For years, there have been rumors about this property. But when Dr. Vincent decided that he was interested in buying this estate, he had to listen to the story. And the owners of the property had quite the story to tell.
There used to be a weird steel garage right here. And in this garage, a couple lived named Norman and Winona Stevens, and they owned all of this property. And it was in that garage Dr. Vincent initially heard what they had planned to do with it.
Norman and Winona Stevens' rumored connection to Nazism grew from a relationship they had with a persuasive man called Herr Schmidt.
Herr Schmidt is rather a mysterious and elusive character. We hardly know anything about him at all. There's just one article from the LA Times that reports that he was wanted by naval intelligence and ultimately rounded up.
But it wasn't Mr. Schmidt's nefarious activities that drew in the couple.
Winona claimed that she had long been interested basically in the occult and paranormal thought. He kind of convinced them both that he had these powers to see into the future, that they needed to build a self-sustaining, basically utopian colony based on National Socialist ideas, and that they needed to do it quickly because America was about to collapse.
If Dr. Vincent's account is true, hidden somewhere within this canyon, a Nazi stronghold was planned in preparation of Hitler overthrowing America.
Something that's not really discussed often in the history of Los Angeles is that there was a real history of Nazi supporters within this area.
From a Nazi perspective, something that LA had going for it was its port. It wasn't monitored, so it was an easy access point for propaganda materials.
The affidavit alludes to the Stevens connection to Nazism, using its alternative name, National Socialism. But there are also other stories that add weight to this claim.
There are rumors floating around that neighbors saw some of these American Nazis, so-called silver shirts, doing paramilitary maneuvers in the gardens and marching up the stairs.
We also know now that there were reports to government officials in Los Angeles who were involved in uprooting Nazis who were embedded in LA, that there was a mansion planned to be built in this area for fascist leaders. So there was some basis for all of these rumors.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the rise of Nazism would result in full-blown war. America initially resisted calls to join the fight, but their reluctance would not last.
In December of 1941, everything changed with the attack on Pearl Harbor.
This was also a pivotal moment for Murphy Ranch.
America is very much entering into the war, and anything that has any kind of allegiance whatsoever with Germany or Nazism is completely outlawed, at which point somewhere like this would have been overnight rendered entirely illegal.
We know that the Stevens stopped paying architects in 1941 because all available architectural plans cease after that date. Whatever was going on here, they were probably under enormous pressure to stop what they were doing.
Herr Schmidt was slow to react and ended up paying a heavy price.
Herr Schmidt was arrested for hiding shortwave radio equipment on the property and allegedly died in prison.
The Stevens stayed on at Murphy Ranch but never built anything more. Eventually, they had had enough and decided to cut their losses and sell up. A local philanthropist was the buyer and turned it into an artist's retreat.
This was actually a really special artist colony where folks could come for a certain amount of time and just focus on their writing. They commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the premier architects of all time, to build adorable little cottages on the property for the artists, and it really flourished for a few years. However, Huntington always overextended himself, began to lose money, and there was also always the threat of wildfires, and they closed the colony.
LA's Murphy Ranch is a confusing collection of ruins, rumors, and hard-to-link facts that will always be open to interpretation.
This is the city of make-believe. But the question is this just another of Hollywood's fantasy tales?
What exactly the Stevens' aims were, what really happened on this land during the 1930s, who else was actually even here, is a total mystery. I don't think we're ever going to know what actually happened.
At the heart of America's Rust Belt, within the city limits of Detroit, is a monument to betrayal.
We're on an island in the Detroit River, just a little upstream from the city's center. Parts are well tended. We have parks, places for swimming and picnics.
It feels like the perfect place to come and enjoy nature. So why are large parts of it completely disused?
This is Belle Isle, and at its center is a dilapidated collection of structures walled off from the rest.
Behind the fence is a complex of wooden ruins that look like something from a completely different time and place.
In some of the structures, you can make out these old, rusting cages, some with their doors just hanging open. It's enough to send shivers up your spine.
This enclosed compound played a significant role in one of Detroit's most notorious corruption scandals.
There were darker forces at play behind the scenes that no one could have predicted. This really was a hero to zero story.
Basically, he was taking advantage of the city. So many people are still upset about what he did to Detroit.
On an island in the Detroit River is a site whose glory days are firmly in the past.
It feels surreal. It's been almost 30 years since I've been inside of the gates here. When I was here in the early 80s, I never envisioned this would happen.
Angela Lugo Thomas knows this place better than most. She worked here during its heyday.
A lot of people got their first jobs working in this space. So I did concessions and I sold souvenirs. But one of my favorite things to do was making the cotton candy, because we used the old style cotton candy where you had a big silver bowl and you just go around with the stick until you get it to a certain size. It's just one of those first memories that you never forget.
Its story begins almost 100 years earlier, at a time when Detroit was on the up.
The first structures were erected here in 1895, just as Detroit was emerging as one of America's most prominent cities.
Detroit was a booming industrial city with factories and immigrants and a very fast-growing economy.
With repetitive jobs and cramped urban living conditions, the burgeoning workforce was in need of an altogether different form of entertainment. They found it here, at the Belle Isle Zoo.
These factory workers and their families, they didn't have the money to travel far outside the city. So the idea they could go to a beautiful island and stroll among these exotic creatures in a zoo, that must have just been delightful for them.
By 1909, they had over 150 animals, including bears, kangaroos, and monkeys.
As Detroit's fortune soared, so too did the zoos. But as industry began to leave the Motor City in the second half of the century, the number of patrons to the zoo dwindled.
After the 1950s, Detroit's population began to decrease rapidly. The city lost nearly 40% of its residents between 1950 and 1980.
This spelt real bad news for the zoo.
With gate receipts diminishing and the city's finances in turmoil, the Belle Isle Zoo looks set to close. Until an ambitious restoration project turned the tide.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my! Welcome to the opening of the Detroit Belle Isle Zoo.
The zoo was revived in the 1980s with a kind of African theme. They called it Safari Land. They built these structures that were kind of informed by an idea of African architecture.
The rejuvenated zoo was a big hit with the public.
Oh, they loved the zoo. I mean, a lot of people, it's their first time going to see animals. You know, a lot of the children had some of their first school trips here in this space.
A new area was added to the zoo in 1980. It was essentially an elevated boardwalk with the animals fenced in at ground level.
The renovation was spearheaded by a new zoo director, Khadija Shelby.
Under the stewardship of Khadija, the zoo bucked the trend of Detroit's declining fortunes. She was a real force in the city at the time, and she was also the nation's first African-American zoo director.
Angela had VIP access to the new facilities, as Khadija was her grandmother.
When I came here, I came with my grandmother. As soon as she was spotted at the bridge of Belle Isle, someone would radio in to let everyone else know that Miss Shelby has arrived and to get everything ready and prepared. She had everyone on their pins and needles because they knew that she expected excellence.
But even as the zoo was revived, Detroit's fortunes continued to go downhill.
Eventually, even Khadija's supreme efforts were not enough.
There was a time when this place was funded very well, and then, of course, like everything else, funding goes away. And so it was difficult for my grandmother to do a lot of the programming that she was used to doing. Sometimes they didn't have the right people to take care of the animals, so it became a point in time when you would go to the zoo and you really didn't see a lot of animals.
And in 1994, with a change of administration in City Hall, she was removed from her post.
It was hard for her to see this zoo, which was her baby, kind of, deteriorate. And so that was sad to watch. The spirit of this place changed after she was not here anymore.
8 years later, the zoo closed. But former director Khadija didn't give up. She joined a campaign aimed at raising the $700,000 needed to reopen the gates. And with another new mayor in City Hall, things were looking up.
In 2002, Kwame Kilpatrick became mayor of Detroit, sweeping into office on a tremendous wave of positivity and hope.
He was known as the hip-hop mayor. Not only was he young, but he was tall, he was handsome, and he promised very exciting times for Detroit.
The city was ecstatic to see him become mayor.
At the same time, Khadija's fundraising had been a success. And with Mayor Kilpatrick pledging his support for the reopening of the zoo, victory was at hand. But things didn't play out as expected.
The rug was completely pulled out from under the campaigners.
Money was raised for the zoo, and it looked like it was going to get a second chance.
But then, nothing happened.
Detroiters were waiting for construction to begin, which it did, but on the other side of the island.
Mayor Kilpatrick, he did a little switcheroo on people because instead of reopening and fixing this space up, he ended up then pouring that money into a new facility that's on the east side of the island called the Belle Isle Nature Center. A lot of people felt duped. They were very upset because he did not follow through on the promise.
And Kilpatrick's misdeeds went far beyond broken promises.
It soon came to light that he was involved in a massive corruption scandal. It involved kickbacks from contractors working for the city.
Suddenly, the whole dirty mess was exposed. This was corruption at the highest levels.
In 2013, Kilpatrick was convicted on 24 federal corruption charges and condemned to 28 years in prison. But in 2021, his sentence was commuted by President Donald Trump on his last day in office.
He's out now, but yeah, he's definitely left a scar on the city that I'm not sure a lot of people are going to get over.
Although it's unlikely the Belle Isle Zoo will open again, Angela is hopeful the space can be reimagined in another form.
Whether it's a nature preserve or maybe paintball, maze or whatever, just utilize the space because it is a big space just have vacant and nobody using it.
As part of its revival, Detroit is rediscovering its waterfront. I suspect that within a few years, we'll see this restored into a beautiful place to visit and a resource for the people of Detroit.
In South Carolina, 2 empty buildings mark how one city changed the course of American history twice.
We're right in the heart of one of the busiest cities on the southeast coast of the United States. We're in Charleston.
In the suburbs is a complex that was built in a time of crisis.
It's a weird, eerie feeling when you look at the inside of this large building. And as they say, if the walls could talk, we might be in trouble.
And on the waterfront, a building that was once the beating heart of the city.
Oh, this is one of those places that very few people know much about, but is really critical to the history of Charleston.
These 2 buildings tell the story of how Charleston found redemption, and in doing so, helped give rise to modern America. Don Campagna has lived in Charleston his entire life. He was a child when he first saw this building.
This building was designed to create in the citizens a feeling of appreciation for the beauty around them. If you're not impressed by this size and this scale, I don't know what it'll take to move your heart.
It's made of this beautiful blonde brick, built to look good, not just be functional.
This part of the structure is now empty, but clues to its function remain.
It's a huge empty space, but down by one of those banks of rubble, you can see flowing water.
Water plays an important role in the story of this building. Its history goes back over 100 years to when Charleston was one of the wealthiest port cities in America. Its prosperity ended when the country was thrown into civil war.
Charleston played a major role during the Civil War, and it was a pivotal city in the fight between the Union and the Confederate armies.
By the end of the conflict, Charleston was left in ruins by the Union Army.
The city was destroyed, absolutely decimated. It wasn't just a military conflagration, it was civilian suffering as well.
For decades, Charleston was a shadow of its former self. But in 1901, Congress gave the city a second chance by constructing a complex that would help transform the U.S. Navy. They built the Charleston Navy Yard.
The Navy built one of the largest dry docks on the entire eastern seaboard right here in Charleston. The shipyard focused mainly on the resupply and repair of ships that were already in the fleet.
The shipyard had a dry dock, crane, water pumps, and management buildings, creating thousands of new jobs. And its beating heart was a brand new power plant.
This is industrial size. You really have to have something that can generate the electricity to power all of that equipment to build the ships that you need.
The Naval Yard was a catalyst for more economic activity because it was attracting workers from all over the country.
The Charleston Navy Yard ushered in a new era of prosperity for the city. But in 1917, the United States entered a new conflict. And the Yard was about to play a special role in keeping the country safe.
During World War I, we had pretty much been a wooden boat Navy. And W1 gave the United States Navy a new steel-hulled fleet. That was as big a transition as we're seeing now between gas engines and electric cars.
The plant powered the refit of 35 destroyers and hundreds of smaller vessels. It was the start of what would become the most powerful naval force the world had ever seen.
The reason America is as great as it is our maritime culture. It's the maritime industries that have made America the country that it is.
Charleston helped prove that America was willing and able to defend itself on the world stage. Its new challenge was to protect the people who fought for it.
Even though America and the Allies won World War I, they only just coped with the demands put on hospitals to treat those injured and hurt.
It was said that the crew of just one destroyer would fill every hospital bed in Charleston.
They needed more capacity and decided to build a bigger, better hospital district right here in Charleston.
In the downtown area, they built the new 33-acre Navy Hospital District.
I don't think there was any question that at that point the government had a very strong inkling that we were likely to wind up in a war and that we were going to have casualties, and we had to be prepared.
The new facility was equipped with an X-ray department, an operating theater, and a recreational courtyard that filled the building with light. Charleston was ready if America was ever thrust into another war. And in 1941, it was.
As many as 4,000 wounded soldiers were treated here every month, many of whom were fighting in Europe and Africa.
There were 75,000 casualties that came into Charleston. The people that came back on those hospital ships were the most seriously wounded, the most in desperate need of care.
The Charleston Navy Hospital was well prepared. It used pioneering methods to care for its patients.
The hospital was designed around the courtyard with different wings all around it. And actually what was revolutionary about the design was that it actually enabled different wards to treat specific injuries.
If you had a doctor that was particularly good at doing repair of legs or repair of arms, then it would be nice for that doctor to be able to go from one patient to the next. It was more efficient use of their personnel.
The new model of separating patients into wards became the basis of modern clinical care. After the Second World War, the Navy Hospital District continued to care for wounded veterans for nearly 3 decades. In 1996, the aged Navy Yard finally closed. Today, Charleston is a cultural capital of the South, its history forged in 3 great conflicts. People like Don Campagna helped keep that history alive.
This needs to be a monument of sorts to the memory of the people who didn't leave here and the people who did, because they both did their duty. If we're ever going to tell the story of that generation and their service and sacrifice, I can't think of a better place than a hospital that made them well and sent them home.